What's up, everybody? It's Kevin with Mix Coach. Thanks for coming and hanging out with me this morning. Over the last 2 weeks, this is the beginning of my third week, or whenever you start your week, whether it's Sunday or Monday. This is into my third week of broadcasting live every day. And it's become quite a part of my life lately, and I'm loving it. And most every morning, I have a guest. Just some cool friends that I have, and that's not going to change at all. But I thought it might be nice this morning just to mix things up a little bit and just teach something instead of like learning stuff from my guests. I thought I would just take, my unique or warped or whatever, how you want to say it, way of looking at a certain thing. And this morning, I want to talk about compressors. And I know that this is one thing that people who are just learning to engineer and who are learning to mix, they want to know about compressors. Compressors, because that compressors are that thing that whenever you read an interview about a mixing engineer, they always talk about their compressor techniques, and they always talk about how they use the compressors to get a certain sound, and new mixers are always fascinated by that. I know I am and was, and but the thing is, a lot of people don't know about compressors. People don't know what they do. They just know that they should have them on a mix and that they make their mix sound better. But a lot of people will go into that mode of like just throwing different compressors on a channel and seeing if it works. And while that's a valid way to look at it sometimes, and I've even done that before, it helps when you know what a compressor does and when you need one and which one might be best for that. So this morning, I want to talk about compressors, and I want to take questions at the end. Hopefully I won't linger in the territory that maybe you know about, and maybe that I'll cover something that might clear something up for you. I don't know. Now, I'll admit that I don't know everything about compressors. I don't know the science behind them sometimes. I have been using them for years, and I do have, and you should develop too, a workflow that includes just knowing which compressor to plug in and where to set it. Because I always advocate when you're learning to mix, there are days that you are just mixing. That's what you do. You are using the tools in your toolbox and you are just mixing. And there are other days that I also really think you should have too, and that is days that you just experiment with stuff, that you crank things too loud and you stack compressors up, which we may talk about that a little bit more. You mess with your verbs, and you listen to, I don't know, you find your favorite drum triggers that you're going to trigger, which we may can cover that later too, if you're interested. But when it comes time to mix, you mix. And so anyway, kind of veered off a little bit. So let's talk about compressors, okay? First of all, I appreciate you people commenting. And like I said, I'm going to be taking comments or questions at the end if you have some. If you don't, I'll just think, wow, I explained that perfectly, which I know I won't. So hopefully you'll have some questions at the end that I can answer. So if you like this channel and you think this is helpful, give me a like. And if you want to, ring the notification bell, and that way you will know the instant I go live, okay? Okay, so we got a few people on, and I want to start talking about compressors, okay? So like I mentioned, compressors is kind of a dark art. Everybody wants to know how to use them. Not a lot of people do know how to use them. Well, I shouldn't say that. A lot of people, sometimes if you have just a magic compressor, you can put it on there and it just makes things sound better. And I'll explain why a little later. Okay. So in my opinion, a compressor has two basic functions. The first function was what it's created for, and that's to control dynamic range. So dynamic range is like the difference between the loudest of the loud and the softest of the soft. So if you guys have ever worked in a studio, you know that you love the kind of singer who actually controls their dynamic range. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they control their volume, although the best of the best can control their volume. They can sound like they're singing loud, but they're not actually singing loud. But the thing I'm talking about is like when you get an experienced vocalist and they're holding a microphone, what you'll see them do, and I'll turn sideways so you can see me, okay? Here's my profile. When they sing the loud notes, they'll pull out of the mic a little bit, okay? And that's something we can cover. There's what I call the 6 dB effect, which means every time you double the distance from your microphone, let's say you're this far away, and then you go to this far away, you just reduced your dynamic range by 6 dB. Okay, so when you see somebody working their mic like this, they're acting like a compressor. Okay, and they're doing it in the best possible way because it doesn't have artifacts to their sound except for maybe just a little more room sound, but they're controlling. Same thing with bass players. If you have a bass player that's just playing and he's like wrong, 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 and you're just kind of all over the place, then you're going, oh, why doesn't he compress himself? Why doesn't he control his own dynamic range? And then people just automatically put a compressor on there to control that. So the reason the compressor was built was to control dynamic range, because back in the day when we were going live to radio, live to disc, or I'm talking about vinyl, if you had a loud note in there, it would ruin the take for everybody, and they'd have to say, stop, let's do it again. The bass player played too loud and it made the needle scratch across. It made the needle jump. So the reason compressors were built, first of all, is just to control dynamic range. And if you look at old like Fairchild compressors, and I'm mentioning some brands here that are kind of expensive, but that's what they did. They created a circuit that would say, when a sound gets above this level, let's pull it down. So that's the main part of it. That's the reason a compressor was built, a dynamic range controller. And if you look at the name of even some of the compressors like LA 2A, LA stood for leveling amplifier, which means that it levels amplitude, okay, and it brings amplitude down. So the second reason that we use compressors for, in my opinion, now this is just my take on it, first of all, was to control the dynamic range. And second of all is to shape the sound with the control of the dynamic range. And I'll explain that a little bit later. And if I'm not clear about something, be sure you comment, because I would love to see your questions and know that I either covered it or explain that a little bit more. So we talk about how it controls dynamic range, and then you can actually shape the sound. And that's what a lot of these mixers are doing. They're shaping the transient or the attack and release of a sound with a compressor that gives it this growl or this smoothness or whatever you're going for. So that's what a compressor does. It controls the dynamic range. So it controls the loudest of the loud and the lowest of the low. Now, it doesn't bring up the low necessarily. It brings down the high. And then you can overall bring up the whole sound. So when you're mixing, as you know, when you're mixing, let me ask a question, and you can comment your answer here. I would love to see it. When you're mixing and you have a singer, or let's don't say singer. When you have a drummer, let's just say you have a drummer who is all over the place, and about every, say, 16th bar, he hits a really loud drum. How do you adjust that drummer? Do you adjust it and just like leave him up, and then just like just kind of take on the looks of the people in the audience when he plays a loud note, and you go, sorry, got to have loud drums? Or do you pull the drums down to where that loud note doesn't catch anybody's attention? I know what I do. Same thing with singers, bass players, guitar players. If you've got a guitar player that's playing along and then all of a sudden he goes, wah, and he hits a really loud note, what are you going to do to keep from that happening again? You're going to pull his volume down, right? And then his overall volume is going to be low, except for those loud notes that he plays. And it's just this cycle of like, no good, because he's going, why can't I hear myself in the mix? And sometimes you don't know to tell him it's because you played that one loud note. I was actually mixing this orchestral piece one time, and I had $70,000 worth of orchestra on this one song, right? And then when you compare the orchestra with the rhythm section, what do you think the producer and the arrangers going to want to hear more? what he paid the most money for, right? So I'm mixing this thing, and I had noticed it before. The drummer hit one loud snare drum, and it was louder than every other snare drum in the record or in the song. And so I didn't do it. And he came in a little early, and we started listening to the thing. And when he heard the snare drum go by that was loud, what do you think he said? Do you think he said, "Hey, there's one snare drum that's too loud. Can you pull that one snare hit down?" He said, "The drums are too loud." And this is what you're going to run into if you're not using a compressor the way you should. Now, I'm not saying that a compressor was the right thing for that. I'm just telling you what dynamic range does to people's comments on your mix. Okay, they don't necessarily know that, hey, if you increase the ratio of that snare drum, you would catch that transient. They're not going to say that because they don't know to say that, right? They're going to say the drums are too loud, or I don't like the drums. All right. So this is, as a mixer, this is what you have to do. You have to figure out why they're asking that, and you have to do it. This is a perfect use of compressors. Okay, so what is a compressor? We know what a compressor does. Now I want to talk about a little bit of how a compressor works. Okay, and I'm diving into deep territory here because I don't have an audio station work. I don't have a session up or anything like that, a session open or anything like that. I'm going to show you pictures. And with that in your mind of controlling dynamic range, I want to try to explain to you what a compressor does. Okay. So in a nutshell, what a compressor does is you set a threshold, and I'll show you different ways to set that, but you set a threshold, and it's like you have the world's best intern on every fader. Okay. Or you have, let me just say this, you have an intern on every fader, and you say, intern, your job is to, when you hear the signal, when you hear the snare drum go above this dB or this loudness, I want you to turn it down real quick, okay? And then I want you to turn it back up. And I'll set that with the attack and release time. So the attack time is how fast you respond to it, and the release time is how fast you come back up to the normal where I told you to stay when the coast is clear, okay? So the attack and release, or the threshold, is at the point where he starts to mess with that volume knob, okay? And then the attack and release is how fast he responds, and then how fast he gets things back to normal, okay? So we've covered the threshold and the attack and release, okay? Now, the ratio is how far he turns it down when he goes above the threshold. If you tell him, hey, let nothing above this certain volume level, I mean, like, you're fired if you let anything go above this level, okay? He says, okay, you just set him into the limiter mode, and that's anything above 10 dB or 10 to 1. Now you'll see these ratios, and you'll see the ratio will be like 2 and then a colon and then 1. That's called a 2-to-1 ratio, and that means that for every 2 dB above the threshold, he only lets 1 out. Okay. So he basically, in effect, halves the volume for that. Now, if we said you let nothing up, you pretty much put him in, you've heard this terminology, brick wall limiting, okay? And that's where he does not let anything, even if he distorts things, he doesn't care, because you told him, the world's fastest intern, you told him not to let anything pass or he was fired. So you set him in the limiter mode, okay? Now, limiter mode has its purposes, but for shaping transients, a lot of times you don't want to go brick wall. So that's compressor controls. Threshold is where he starts to work. Attack and release is how fast he responds and how fast he returns to back what normal is. And the ratio is how much he responds to that, okay? Now, don't let this confuse you. There are several ways that compressors do this, and I want to show you one here. This, and I just pulled up Sweetwater because they have every compressor probably known to man. Okay, so this is an this is an 1176. Now, let me find, I'm going to go to this tab here, and I'm going to show you, hopefully you can see this. Okay, I'm just going to trust that you can see this. Now, if you look, let's work from there's the ratio there, right? And these 1176s, they have pre-selected ratios. On some of the newer ones, you can actually sweep between these, but you will always hit these numbers. Now, 4-to-1 is kind of the lowest that this thing does. It's good for bass guitars. It's good for vocals. It's good for anything that you want to be gentle with, and things even that that you don't want to necessarily hear it that much. Now, all of these compressors will have character depending on how much you drive it. But here's the ratio, right? 4, 8, 12, and 20. And here's a little insider tip. On these 1176s, a hack that people have found is that you can push all of these in at the same time, and that's like infinity to one, right? That's the brick wall limiter. And these things, they have a character about them, and they don't necessarily distort things, but they give it a lot of character. So you might want to try that. I would start at the bottom, work to the top, and then when you get really bored, just try to push them all in, okay? Now, here's the attack and release. Now, these compressors are really fast. So even slow is really fast on these things. So I usually start with the attack, which is the top one all the way to the left. And that's going to grab everything. That's the fastest. That's the world's not only best intern that controls your volume, but he's also the fastest, okay? That's when he's had his coffee and he's ready to go. As you turn it to the right, he's had a late night. He is not up to it yet, and he's going to respond pretty slow, okay? The release the same way. The left is the fastest. I believe I'm right on this. The left is the fastest, and the right is the slowest. So I usually start off with the top one at about 9 o'clock and the bottom one at about 3 o'clock. Pretty simple. And when, just a little insider tip here, when you use a plug-in and you pull that plug-in up, usually the way the plug-in comes will work. It'll work just fine. Okay, so this 1176 is a little bit different than some other compressors, because if you see what's missing here, there's no threshold, right? What the heck? He said threshold on every one of these compressors, and there's no threshold on here. What's going on? Well, the threshold is set internally on this guy, and the way you get past the threshold is by turning the input up. Okay, so as you turn the input up, you're going to see this meter on the right moving down a little bit, or based on how you have it set. Now, this one doesn't, for some reason. There it is. We didn't see it on the right, but you see the meter on the right hand side. The top says GR, and that stands for gain reduction. The level will go to the 0, and it will stay there, and then it will only tell you how much gain you're reducing. Okay, so it's kind of like the progress report for the world's fastest intern, and it'll say, "Hey, your intern just pulled it down a dB. Just wanted you to know." And then the other two are meters for, like, if you're trying to set a level to the output. And let's just say you're trying to get things at 0, you can set your meters for that. Most people only use gain reduction meter because they only want to see how hard the compressor is working. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, there they are right there. It's a better view of them. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, so you're looking at this compressor and you're going, why doesn't it have a threshold? And the reason why is because the threshold is internally set. The way you get above the threshold is to turn the input up. Okay, when you turn the input up, you need to compensate it by turning the output down. Otherwise, you're going to be tricked very quickly into thinking that you've done some work when you haven't done any work yet, because your ear will always perceive louder is better, okay, until the point where it's too loud or it distorts, okay, which you don't want to do that. A lot of my favorite compressors will have this thing called auto makeup gain. We'll talk about makeup gain here in just a minute, hopefully. So makeup gain is what I'm talking about here. If you were to grab this compressor here and you were to turn the input up, you would need to turn the output down in order to really hear what the compressor is doing. Okay, a lot of compressors have this automatic makeup gain, and those are my favorite because you can't hear how loud it's getting. You can only hear what the effect of it is doing, whether it's controlling the dynamic range or not. Okay, so that's an 1176. This is how you do it. Here's how you start with it. On the right, hit gain reduction. On this one, hit 4 to 1. Start there. Attack. Take the top one, turn it to the left to 9 o'clock. Take the bottom one, turn it to the right at 3 o'clock. Do the same thing with this. Set the input at, say, 30 and set the output at 18. And as you go up or down, compensate one for the other, okay? Take the input up, the output down, until you can't really hear yourself gaining volume there, okay? All right, so let's look at another one. That's 1176, very popular compressor. DBX 160X. I want to show you this one. There's an old school version of this. Actually, let me try and see. Oh, you know what? They don't sell X's anymore. They sell DBX 160A. So let me pull that one up because it's a little bit of a neater or more modern interface. If I can find one, where are these things at? Okay, we'll go back to the DBX 160. Okay. Now this is the Waves version of the DBX 160. You'll see these a lot in the studios. I'm just going to show this one right now because it's big, pretty easy to see. Okay, so let's go to the top left. Okay, and by the way, the bottom half of this you usually don't see on a regular one. Okay, you know what? Let's go to the bottom here. This guy right here, it says gain change, right? That is the GR on the other compressor. It's the one that shows you how much you're working. Okay. Output, input, those are for the meters, okay? Input meter will show you what you're putting into the limiter, and the output is what you're taking, what it's putting out after the gain reduction, after the output gain, everything, okay? Okay, collapse, don't press that button. Everything in your studio will fall off of the stands, okay? I'm kidding. It will probably take this bottom part away. I haven't used this one on DBX, on the Waves part. Okay, top left. Okay, what you normally see on these guys when you see them in the studio, and a lot of times in plug-in form, this is a stereo-looking version of it. They only come with the top 3 half knobs, okay, because they were mono. Okay, so let's look at the top left, which is threshold. Okay, so as you can see, this is the threshold. It had the input is automatically set on this one. Instead of the threshold, it's the input that's automatically set. And the way you get the compressor to start responding, the way you get your intern is to set the threshold. Now, typically, I think the threshold is up around 2 o'clock. That's kind of like 0. That's in the normal spot. And if you look at it, that would make sense because there's a 1 at 3 o'clock, and then there's a 0.3. So I usually just start it at about 1 or 2 o'clock, okay? Now, compression, R, is the compression ratio. And if you go all the way down to the left, it's 1 to 1, which means that for every 1 dB he's above the threshold, 1 dB comes out, right? So that would say that there's not a lot of action going on there. There's not a lot of gain reduction. Now, let me just put a pin in that for a second. All of these compressors have character about them. They're going through another piece of your signal is going through another piece of signal path. So these things have character. So some people, especially like the tube stuff, like like the LA2A and even the 1176, they have character, even signal going through them. And some people put them through the transformers or whatever just to get that sound, not necessarily to get the gain reduction. So the 1-to-1 ratio, don't overlook it. Don't think that you're not working, because you may be, because these things do have character. So, okay, bottom center, if you scroll it all the way to the bottom, you've got a 1 ratio. If you turn it up to the right a little bit, you have 1.5 to 1. Just remember to 1 at the end of all these. If you keep going up, it's 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1. Okay, so I love the way a guy named Chris Lord-Alge, Tom Lord-Alge, compress. They don't compress at high ratios. And DBX 160 is one of the ones they've used. This is what you call a VCA circuit. So there's no tubes. There's only a VCA, which stands for voltage controlled amplifier. Okay. That's this kind of circuit. Anyway, they run their stuff through VCAs. Another VCA, SSL. That's a brand of mixing console compressors. They have this VCA circuit. So these VCAs are kind of known for their attitude. Okay, they had this aggressive sound, right? But Chris Ordalgie doesn't compress at high ratios. He turns that threshold all the way up, or all the way down. So anything going through this is getting compressed at a really low ratio. So he's getting a lot of character, but not a ton of noticeable noise reduction. All right. So this one, how you start on this one, you turn the threshold. Oh, and the output gain. Let's talk about that real quick. So as you reduce the gain by 4 dB or 5 dB, you want to get the most mileage out of that. So you turn up your overall volume, right? This is how you turn off the overall volume with the output gain. Okay. So if you're compressing consistently 4 to 1, and this decibel thing right here is going down right here, it looks like 11, 12, 13 dB. Then you notice they've got the output cranked up. Now, get the most mileage out of it, turn your output up a little bit, and take advantage of the fact that you now have a bass player who's playing more consistently. You can get him louder, and he probably won't ask the question, why can't I hear myself in the mix? And you don't have to say, because you can't play the same note at the same volume 2 times in a row. And I have to compensate for the louder one. So, you don't have to be a smart aleck like that, but this is why we compress, right? Not necessarily to get the sound, but to correct it. Okay, so this is a DBX 160. I'm going to show you how to set that up. Whoop, okay. Oh, well, I don't know if I've got that. Okay, cool. This is a better picture. Okay, this is how you set this thing up. Threshold, put it about right here, about 2 o'clock. Compression, take it down to like 2, anywhere from 2 to 4. And if you're feeling brave, you see that infinity? That is the brick wall limiter. Now these things won't necessarily distort. They start to have character. But now that you know kind of how compressors work, take it for a test run. Okay, run your snare through there and figure out. Now that you kind of know what's going on, take it for a run in the park. Output. Okay, so threshold here, compression ratio between here and here, and then the output gain. Push it up to whatever this is coming down. It's a good rule of thumb. So if it's at 0 most of the time and it's coming down -5, push it up to 5. Okay, and that way, when you bypass it and you listen to the sound with the compressor and without the compressor, they're at the same volume. Your ear doesn't say that one's louder. Your ear just says that one has more character, or that one sounds more smooth because the loudest things are taken down and the overall volume is brought up by that same amount. Okay, let's cover one more compressor, and then I will take some questions. This is called an LA2A. This one is different than all of the other ones, and I'll tell you why. Okay, cool. It's coming up. Okay, hopefully I can scroll over. Okay, here's the whole view. Okay, so this one, if you notice, it doesn't have an input, right? It has a gain. That's the output gain. Okay, that's how much the output gain is. So this is the output on the 1176. This is the output makeup gain. This is what this is here. Okay. Peak reduction. This is the threshold. So if this is at 0, you're just going through the tubes and you're getting that character from this guy. And some people just like to run it through the transformers and the tubes. You can see one of those transformers sitting right there. They're known as much for their transformers and their character as they are how much they reduce. Okay, so I have to admit, I don't know everything there is to know about this guy. I just know that I put it in compress mode. Limit mode's a little bit more. I don't know exactly what that one does. Maybe one of you guys can mention what this is in the comments. I know that when you're in compress mode, I think the ratio is at 10-1. So the thing that's set on this one is the ratio. It's set to 10-1. You have to control the input to this guy with whatever the stage before it was. So if you've got a mic preamplifier, you want to crank it up until you start to until you get a proper input. So most people leave this peak reduction set at around 30 usually is what I see. So when you have it set to 30, you want to gain stage it right and make sure that you can see the output over here. So anyway, okay, let's not get too wrapped up here, because I don't know. This is one of those that I don't know all the inner workings for, but this is what I normally do. I usually set the output gain. This is a perfect way to set one up. Set the output, turn the peak reduction all the way down, okay? And then set the gain until you can bypass it in your signal chain and it sounds at the same level as without it. Without it. That way you've got your gain set up, okay? Now you can start dialing in this peak reduction and you can actually see what it does, right? And then when you see it reducing the gain by 5 dB, which you can really dig into these things, and you can't really hear them. This is called an opto compressor. So when you see an opto setting, this is what they're talking about without having to pay a copyright or whatever. Okay, so then you start pulling up your peak reduction until you see that. And then if you want to output the gain a little bit more, you turn it up. Each one of these is a little bit differently because, my gosh, it's like a 50, 60-year-old technology that we still love today, okay? This is metering up here. This is the output. This is where you can tell where you're actually putting out the tape or whatever. This is gain reduction in the middle. This tells you how much. Every one of them has that. It tells you how much you're reducing the gain. And then the output +4. I don't know. It just depends on what your system is and how you're running it out. Gain reduction is where most people leave that. Okay. So real quick, how to set this one up. Turn your peak reduction all the way down. By the way, a little caveat here. As I said in the 1176, when you instantiate one of these plugins into your mix, it's going to come up to the way most people use it. Okay. So don't overthink this. It's not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. It's not rocket surgery. It's not that hard to do. I'm just telling you kind of the inner workings of this thing, so you'll know if you want to tweak something, where you go to first on these guys. So here's how you set it up. Peak reduction, 0. Gain, set it to whatever it sounds the same with or without it, okay? You don't want this thing being really loud, so when you turn it on, you go like, oh man, I don't have to do anything. It just sounds better. Well, louder is better in your ear, right? You're not really doing anything except causing problems for every other instrument in the mix. If you think that you just make everything louder, you run into this point where everything just sounds worse, okay? So you want to set this guy to where it sounds the same whether it's in or out, and then you start tweaking it up, and then you set the output gain, okay? But even in the end, on all these compressors, you don't want this. And if I can give you one tip right now, it's this: don't when you set a compressor in your line, right? Let's just say we kept it really, really simple, and we just had a vocal and we had an 1176 or an LA2A on it. You don't want it to be louder when you bypass it, because that's what your faders are for, right? You want it to be in a good place where everything's around 0. So you may want to tweak it a little bit, but you don't want it to be that much louder, because if this guy's louder, if you were to put an EQ after it, then you're peaking the input of that EQ, and you're possibly causing some clips and distortion that you don't want in your mix. So don't be a superhero when it comes to putting compressors in your signal chain, okay? You don't want it to sound louder. You want to control the dynamics of it, okay? At least that's the way I feel about it today. It could change, right? All right, so is that pretty cool? Limit, if you push it up to limit, I think maybe the ratio goes up. I don't know, honestly. I don't. I just know that most people use it in compress mode. And that's it. So anyway, that's all I know about that. Okay. All right. So hopefully this has been one of those things that maybe it's like, I knew all that. Or maybe it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you might have cleared some stuff up for me. Hopefully I haven't sent you the other direction. So, okay, I'm going to take some questions now, and I'm just going to go from the top to the bottom because that's the chronological order. Mark Jacoby says, "Good morning." Oh, hey, let me mention this. I just put together a resource. I compiled some of my best training, and I put it in a package for you. And if you go to mixcoach.com, if you just go to, let me create a new banner here real quick. Just go to mixcoach.com. This here, and on the front page, it's like improve your mixes overnight. If you think that will help you, click that. You'll be immediately sent to this audio training that I did. And it's ways to triangulate your mix and make your mixes better. And mainly geared for studio, but it will work for anybody that wants to mix. And I've even got some extra stuff in there. So go to mixcoach.com and get that free resource if you think it'll help. Okay. I'm going to leave that up for a couple minutes. No, I'm going to take it away. I'm going to put the link below in the comments. Mixcoach.com. Okay. So now I'm going to go to the comments now and go top to bottom. Good morning, Mark. Tommy Swindle's with us here. Got a great studio in Albertville, Alabama, I think. Ahmed, nice to meet you, man. Back or right mixing. Don't know what you mean, Rush, but I'm sure that you'll clarify if you're still here. Dave Henry, you get a new drummer. Well, you can't always get a new drummer, and that's why they invented compressors, right? You can't always get a new bass player, so that's why they invented the compressors. Rick Elliott. Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it, man. Looking for questions if you have them. Shannon, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a compliment. Really do appreciate that. Justin says great info. Thank you. No bypass. Yeah, it would be nice. A couple of things that need to be on every compressor is a bypass to where you can actually bypass it from the compressor while your plug-in is still up and you can adjust the gain there. And another thing would be a mix knob. We'll cover that later, like like parallel compression. There is a way to, instead of just being gentle with the compressor, that you want to be like, say, okay, I'm making copy and this compressor is not going to do anything. We're going to be real gentle with this bass player. We're going to like not reduce his gain a lot. And then we're going to get your evil twin brother and we're going to compress the heck out of your bass, right? And then we're going to add those two signals together and see what we come up with. That's a great way to compress too. We'll cover that a little later, okay? Isaac Moreno, thank you. Thank you for coming, Isaac. Rob Glick. Rob Glick says it does change ratio. You talking about the LA2A? I only use it for the roads. Yeah. Now that you know how compressors work, go and experiment with them. Let's see. Mark Jacoby. Oh, let's see. Rob Glick. Let me put that up there while I clear my throat. That's cool. I will try that. I haven't. I know you use a lot of Rhodes in your jazz recordings, and they sound good. So I may have to try an 1176 on the Rhodes. Let's see. Mark Jacoby, as an inexperienced mixer, my go-to thing with the compressor is less is more. Gentle is better than hard. If you're a beginning mixer, absolutely that's the way to go. And there is even a way. And this is a more advanced thing to do, but there's even a way, just because you don't necessarily hear that a compressor is pulling down a sound doesn't mean it's not working. It is. And to me, if you're mixing a more timeless kind of music like Rob does, he does jazz, you don't necessarily want to hear the character of a compressor because that becomes more of a, in my opinion, I teach on Mix Coach, there's two styles of mixing music. One is the timeless style, which is what you'll find a lot of your your jazz and your classical, your bluegrass, your even Americana, your music that only sounds different. If you listen to music from the 50s or 60s, that, let's just say Frank Sinatra, and he was recording at Capitol, they're not trying to get a snap out of a snare drum. They're trying to capture what the music sounded like. Those big band guys are playing instruments that were invented in the 50s, and now those instruments are still, they're buying, the new musicians are buying the old instruments, right? So really the only difference is the way it's recorded. You don't want to have a pop sound and snare on that kind of stuff. It's timeless, right? You want it to be timeless. You don't want it to sound like, that sounds like somebody was trying to mix classical music in the disco era. You don't want that. You want it to be timeless, right? You don't want people to say that. Trendy music, it changes every week, every month. The newest thing, if you're doing what's current, you're already behind, right? That's, you use a compressor to get that sound. So anyway, less is more. But there is a way to take compressors. Going back to your question, Mark, there is a way to take compressors and very gently compress. Like, let's just say use two of them. Stack an 1176 and an LA2A. And don't move the meter much on either one of them and see what you come up with. You come up with a pretty contained sound that doesn't sound like you have a compressor. It just sounds like you have the world's best intern, right? Do you always use a compressor? Shannon says. Not always. It really depends on whether the music that you're mixing can contain the dynamic range. Now, the trade-off for mixing timeless kinds of music is it's very dynamic, right? If you listen to an orchestral piece, you'll hear very dum 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 dum. It'll be really light, and that's okay. And then when they get loud, it gets really loud. There's a dynamic range that's wide. Whenever you're mixing pop music and you're working with musicians who are not the best at controlling their dynamic range, then I use a compressor for that. And Shannon, on the board at our church, there's compressors on pretty much every channel. Isaac Moreno, did you cover the Destresser? I did not cover the Destresser. I covered a DBX 160. I covered 1176, and I covered an LA2. The Destresser is kind of one of those, it's kind of a magic compressor. It kind of does all these things well. It has an opto mode on it, which covers the 1176. And to be honest with you, I don't own a Destresser. I wish I did. I think I may go buy the plug-in just so I can get more used to it. But I used to use it a lot. It's a great compressor. I didn't cover it though, Isaac. Sorry, I did cover those other three though. Rob said Rhodes, he was referring to an LA2A. So when you flip it to the limiter mode, it changes the ratio. But I'm pretty sure that in limiter mode, it's 10 dB or 10-to-1 ratio that we talked about. Justin says, no questions here, just praise. Thank you, Justin. I appreciate that. Rob says he uses an LA2A much more than 1176. I admire those. I have sat in on a lot of mixes of guys that do really good mixing, and I notice what they do, and I admire the guys that go, you know what this needs? 1176. And I had a guy to do that. He said his vocal, and this is before plugins, he was mixing and he said, you know what? This guy needs an LA2A on his vocal. And he went and rented one. Cost him like $125 for the day. And he went and got one of these bad boys here, and he put it on that vocal, and I guess it sounded better. But so just covering other things here. Rob says, he uses an LA2 more than 1176 on the project he's working with. And I was able to listen to one of Rob's mixes. It sounded really good. Let me know when it comes out, Rob. He says you stack the LA2A. You put two LA2As on top of each other, or do you use it in tandem with an 1176? Because I've done both. I'll tell you a story about that later. Tommy Swindle says, same here. I tend to use the LA2A more than the 1176. It depends on the source. Sometimes the 1176. I stack them often too. Learned that from me. Hey, all right, cool. Well, I'll go ahead and tell the story. There's a compressor called a vac rack. They were very expensive when they first came out, but man, did they ever sound good. Um, and a guy brought me some. He was an intern of mine, actually, or not an intern. He was an assistant of mine who had a lot more money to spend on. He had a lot more money to spend on mic pre's and mics and compressors than I did. And he offered to sell them to me. I could not afford those guys. So you know what I did? What I think every one of you should do. When you get a piece of gear like that, find what you own already, find what sounds the closest to it. And that's what I was doing. I was going, no, it doesn't sound like an 1176 bypass, put an LA2A. No, it doesn't sound like an LA2A. And then I, for some reason, unbypassed both of them and therefore stacking the compressor. And I don't remember, and this could switch every time, but had an 1176 on the top, LA2A on the bottom. Neither one of them were doing a lot of work. But when I went back and forth between his vac rack and this, it was a magic sauce, man. And I tell that story on some of my training on mix coach, and that's what Tommy's referring to. Thanks, Tommy, for mentioning that. I appreciate it. I'm blushing right now. I've been demoing the Destresser on drums. Just wow. Yeah, that's a great compressor, man. Okay, so let me pitch back my shameless plug real quick here. If you go to mixcoach.com, I have prepared some training for you. I feel like it's really good training. There's a 25-minute audio course, and I'm talking about how you compare your mixes, how to triangulate a mix. And don't let that word scare you. It's the biggest word I know, though. Triangulate. That means that if you're listening to one set of reference monitors, you're probably not doing it right, because you have to, and I'll talk about this in the training, how each set of monitors has a different story to tell. So it's like, I call it the Columbo effect. Okay. I'm making up all this stuff as I go along. So if you ever watched the Columbo, he had a lazy eye and he wore a trench coat, and he would ask these seemingly dumb questions. But what he was doing was getting this person's story so he could put everything and triangulate everybody's personal truth with what the real truth was, right? And then, so that's what you have to ask your monitors. If you're mixing with a set of KRKs, they're going to tell a certain story better than anybody else can. And I don't know what that is because I don't have a set of those. I do have a set of Barefoots, and those Barefoots, the story they tell is imaging and low end. They will tell you what the low end is going to be. I have a set of Yamaha RHM5As, a $50 set of headphones. Then I pray never go bad, because I love those things. They also tell a really good low end story. They also tell if you've got too much high end in it. So, and then I've got a set of NS10s. NS10s will tell you the story. If you want to hear the story about whether the vocal was in the right place in your mix, or whether your snare drum is in the right place in the mix, you get the NS10s to tell you the story. Okay. Anyway, that's all. That training is at mixcoach.com. Go check it out. Mixcoach.com is right there on the front page. You scroll down to the bottom and you click the button. You will land on the page. And make sure you put a good email address in there, because I'm going to hook you up with some more good training. Like I said, I compiled a lot of my best training, and it's going to be in this course here. So check it out, okay? Looks like I've got a couple more comments I'm going to look at, and then we're going to call it a day. I can't believe I just freestyle for like 50 minutes. Appreciate you guys putting that with me. Okay, maybe I have time to answer this real quick. What are some of the instances where you use compressors other than writing gain and adding color? That is a great question, man. Let me think about that just for a second. I think what it comes down to on this one, I think is it Savara or Siva? I can't necessarily tell. Maybe you can comment here. This is the last question I'll take, because I don't want to go too long. I don't want to bore people. I think it's the speed in which you have to mix. So if you're mixing something live or nearly live, you don't have the mental bandwidth to ride every fader, and you've only got 10 fingers and 2 hands. So really you can only do, what is that? 100 things at one time. And if you've got a bass player that is just like hitting that loud note every now and then, and you can't stop it, put a compressor on it. Don't worry about it. Work with Siva. Thank you, man. Put a compressor on it, set it the best you can, get through the thing, and then talk to your bass player and say, hey, if you want me to mix you louder, you're going to have to learn to control your dynamic range. I have to compress to your loudest note. So make sure that your other notes are the same volume as your loudest note. Will be good. Talk to your vocalist about that too. That's in a live environment. If you want it to sound the most timeless as you can, use less compression. Don't use that character thing that we can get out of compressors for that. Use your faders for that. Still the best way to get the least amount of character and the most amount of timelessness is using the fader. Gentle compression ratios, stacking compressors, that's how you don't add color that much with those. When you start digging into them, like this LA2A, you can get, I've seen people, like I walked in the studio one time and this meter down here was like -10, -15. And I'm like, he must have it bypassed because I don't hear it that much. That's how good these compressors are. So what are some of the instances where you use compressors? Speed. And we're just using compressors, not adding color. When you're trying to get vocalists to blend, because we talked to Kevin McManus a few weeks ago or last week, and he said, always have your fingers on the faders. Don't ever leave your fingers off the faders. In the studio, we have automation for that. You're always messing with the faders. Live environment, you have what you have. You have to go with what you have, right? If you're trying to get 3 singers or 4 singers or 5 singers to blend together, and you've got one guy that's down here most of the time, and then he eats his microphone, you got to use a compressor on him, right? And then be a good teacher, be a good mix coach, and go to that guy and say, hey, I'm having a little trouble getting you to blend in with everybody, and I have to mix you with the loudest note. And this is how you can use egos to your best interest, okay? If you tell a singer, hey, I can't mix you loud because your vocal level's not consistent, I can show you how to fix that if you'll do it, and then I can mix you louder, and they'll be all about it, right? And then you start letting them compress themselves before you have to add compression to it. But that's just a couple of things. If you're wanting to add compression and not do add color, that's how I would use it. Siva. Thanks for coming today, man. Y'all go and check out the mixcoach.com. There's some good info in there. Oh, I want to mention too, check out Working Class Audio's podcast today. I'm going to see if I'm on here. Hang on. He interviewed me last week. I'm going to see if he's launched it yet. Look who's on the Working Class Audio podcast today. It's me, back when I buzzed my head. So there's some, let me move this out of the way. So check out Working Class Audio podcast today. All right. If I didn't take up enough of your time, go over there and you can hear me chat some more. Okay. Hey, it's been good hanging out with you guys today. I have enjoyed it. I may do this a little bit more in the comments below, or email. I don't know about email, but in the comments, just let me know what you want me to talk about. Okay. This was fun. Okay. I'm going to let you go for now. And it's been good hanging out with you. Hope you have a great Monday. Okay.